Lontrell Donnell Williams Jr. Pooh's story just got a whole lot uglier. Yesterday, this looked like one of those breaking stories where the FBI hit a home tied to a rapper's family. Cameras showed up and everybody started guessing before the facts were out. But now this thing has turned into something much bigger, because federal prosecutors say Williams is one of 9 men charged in a Dallas kidnapping case.
I'm Ryan Rabel, I'm the U.S. Attorney for the Northern District of Texas. Thank you for coming. This week, 9 individuals, including well-known musical artists, kidnapped and robbed at gunpoint numerous victims at a music studio in Dallas, Texas. 8 of the 9 were arrested yesterday in Dallas, Memphis, and Nashville. These individuals who are charged and arrested include Lontrell Williams Jr., also known as Pooh Shiesty, Lontrell Williams Sr., Rodney Wright Jr., also known as Big 30, Kadarius Waters, Demarion Gibson, DeMarcus Glover, Corday Johnson, Darian McDaniel, and Terrence Rogers has not been arrested yet, but will be soon. The complaint alleges that on January 10th of this year, 3 music industry professionals traveled to Dallas for a scheduled business meeting. Lontrell Williams Jr. arranged this meeting purportedly to discuss the terms of his recording contract with one of the victims. As alleged, once these 3 men were inside the recording studio, Williams Jr. and 8 co-conspirators, several of whom traveled from Memphis, Tennessee, executed a coordinated armed takeover. As alleged, Williams Jr. produced an AK-style pistol and forced one of the victims to sign a release from the recording contract at gunpoint. The remaining conspirators displayed firearms and robbed the other victims of Rolex watches, jewelry, cash, and other high-value items. One of the victims was actually choked by one of the defendants to the point of near unconsciousness. Defendant Wright barricaded the studio door with his body to prevent the victims from escaping. The ringleader of the conspiracy, Lontrell Williams Jr., was on home confinement at the time of the offense, as alleged, for a prior firearms conspiracy charge and conviction out of the Southern District of Florida. Towards the end of his prison sentence, he had been granted home detention. Part of the terms of his home detention were that he would not commit another federal offense or possess a firearm. His father, Lontrell Williams Sr., is alleged to have helped plan and execute the federal kidnapping as charged in the complaint. And as described further in the complaint, within hours of leaving the Dallas studio, a number of the defendants were on social media displaying some of the items that appeared to be the jewelry that had been robbed from the victims.
And this is not just his name being loosely attached to a house anymore. According to the feds, this case also pulls in his father and Big 30, and the allegation at the center of it is the kind of twist that makes people stop scrolling immediately. Prosecutors say this all started with what looked like a business meeting. Then, once the victims got inside the studio, it allegedly turned into an armed takeover. That means the raid story was only the surface. The real headline is that the government is now saying this was not random, not spontaneous, and not some messy misunderstanding. They're painting it like a setup tied to business, pressure, and force. And if that allegation is true, then this instantly becomes one of the wildest rap stories of the year. Because now, the question is not just why the FBI showed up at that home. It's what exactly they believe he and the others did before those agents ever got there. According to the DOJ, this case goes back to January 10th in Dallas. Federal prosecutors say 3 music industry professionals traveled there for what was supposed to be a scheduled business meeting. The person who allegedly arranged that meeting was Pooh, and the purpose, at least on the surface, was supposedly to discuss the terms of his recording contract with one of the victims. That's what makes this hit so hard, because if the government's version is accurate, this wasn't a case where something got heated after a chance encounter. They're saying the meeting itself was the bait. Once those men got inside the studio, prosecutors say Pooh and 8 co-conspirators allegedly carried out a coordinated armed takeover. Not an argument, not a dispute that got out of hand, a coordinated takeover. That wording matters. It tells the audience this is being treated like a planned federal case, not gossip, not internet rumor, and not some soft rap blog update. The feds are making it sound organized, deliberate, and built around leverage. And then comes the detail that really gives this story its title, because prosecutors say the point was not only to scare people, but to force paperwork. The strongest part of this entire story is the contract release angle. Federal prosecutors allege that Pooh pulled an AK-style weapon and forced one of the victims to sign a release from his recording contract at gunpoint. That is the detail that makes the whole thing feel less like a standard robbery story and more like a power move gone all the way federal. And it doesn't stop there. The feds also say the other men displayed weapons and robbed the other victims of Rolex watches, jewelry, cash, and other high-value items. On top of that, one victim was allegedly choked to the point of near unconsciousness. That is a brutal allegation. Then prosecutors add another layer by saying Big 30 blocked the studio door with his body so the victims could not escape. So now you've got a story with multiple turns. First, a supposed business meeting, then an alleged armed takeover, then a forced signature, then robbery allegations, then a victim allegedly being choked, then another rapper allegedly helping trap people inside. It has the receipts, the faces, the legal stakes, and a detail so strong that the title almost writes itself. But what makes this even worse for Pooh is not just what prosecutors say happened. It's when they say it happened. The part that really raises the temperature is Pooh's legal status at the time. The DOJ says he was on home confinement for a prior firearms conspiracy conviction out of Florida when this allegedly went down. And the government says one of the conditions of that home detention was simple: do not commit another crime and do not possess firearms. So if prosecutors prove what they're alleging, this is not just a fresh case. This becomes a case where they say he committed a new violent federal offense while still finishing out the old one. That changes the optics immediately, and it gets even worse because the feds also say his father helped plan and execute the kidnapping. So now the story is no longer just rapper trouble. It becomes a father and son federal storyline, with outside names attached and a business dispute sitting right in the center of it. That is much heavier than the original raid headline. Yesterday, people were still asking whether Pooh himself was even the target. Now the DOJ has already moved way past that. They're naming him, naming his father, naming Big 30, and saying this case can carry a sentence of up to life. That's not internet noise. That's serious federal exposure. And the reason the government sounds so confident is because they're already pointing to the evidence. This is where the story gets even more dangerous from a content angle, because the feds did not just announce charges and leave it vague. They started listing receipts. Prosecutors say they have electronic monitoring data placing Pooh at the scene. They say they have cell phone records and license plate reader data showing coordinated travel from Memphis to Dallas. They say rental car records show his father rented a vehicle used by the group. Then they add surveillance footage, not just from the studio, but also from a nearby office supply store and a hotel where several of the defendants allegedly stayed after the incident. They also say latent fingerprints from the crime scene match 2 defendants. And then comes the part. The government says some of the defendants were posting what looked like stolen jewelry on social media within hours of leaving the studio. They even say Greyhound bus records helped track the travel back from Dallas to Memphis the next day. That is a crazy stack of alleged evidence for a rap case. And once you connect that back to the FBI raid at the family home, the story feels different. Because the raid was the teaser. The federal complaint is the real explosion. Now the only question is how hard you want to push the last part, because that's where the story gets even more viral. Multiple outlets are now reporting that Gucci Mane was one of the victims in that Dallas studio case. If that ends up holding up cleanly in the paperwork, then this story goes from already big to absolutely massive, because now the contract release angle lands even harder. But here's the part I would handle carefully. Officials did not publicly name the victims in the DOJ release. And at the press conference, they were still avoiding that question. Now, the biggest question is what happens next, because this story still doesn't feel finished. If you want the next chapter when it drops, subscribe.